be seated. If you'd like to watch my children's sermon, it's another one of my Mr. Potato Head children's sermon series. I posted it on Facebook last night, so it should be up there. But I still remember the first time I went fishing. Do you remember the first time you went fishing? I think we can all remember that, or many of us. I was about 10 years old, and we were visiting my Uncle Ken and Aunt Thelma up in Minnesota. So we hopped in the back of Uncle Ken's pickup truck, and he drove us the short ride from their house down the dirt road to the lake. And he showed me how to tie the lure on the fishing line and how to cast. So I practiced a bit, got the hang of it from shore. And then I walked to the end of the pier with my rod. And before long, I had a largemouth bass on the end of my line. I can still feel the thrill of how that fish tugged on the line and how it was trying to swim away as I reeled it in. Before that, I had never liked to eat fish before, but we fried up what we caught, for lunch, and that was the best thing I ever tasted. I've been a fish eater ever since then. Well, these days, people will ask me if I'm a fisherman, and I answer, well, I've fished. Mostly, when I go fishing, what I reel in is bad luck, as in nothing. So I feel like I can relate to Simon, who we now know as Peter, as well as to James and John, who we hear about all of these guys in the gospel today. They've worked all night and caught nothing. If it was me, I would have given up long before them. But this was their job. This was their livelihood. People were counting on them. Everyone from the crew who were working on the boats with them, to the family members of the crew, to the people waiting to go to the market so they could buy fresh fish to feed their families. These fishermen were fishing not just for themselves or because they liked it and were good at it. They were fishing because they had a whole network of people who relied on them. That sense of responsibility is why I imagine they listened to Jesus, who was not a fisherman but a carpenter's son, when he said to them, "Put out into the deep water and let down your nets for a catch." "If you say so," Peter answered. "We've worked all night. We've caught nothing. But if you say so, fine. One more try." So began the call to discipleship of Peter, James, and John. It began not in a moment of great clarity or conviction or commitment, with the heavens opening above them, but it began in a moment of doubt, mixed with a desire to maybe have faith, but it wasn't really a full-fledged faith. But that was enough. Peter offered his doubt and desire to Jesus, and that was his first step on a long journey that would lead him to become the great apostle who we know about now. But Peter didn't start there. He didn't start being great. He started with doubt and desire. And then Jesus led the rest of the way from that starting point, calling Peter to follow and learn as he went along. And Peter grew into the purpose that God had for him, right as he was living his regular life. There was nothing mystical about it. And like Peter, we can grow into God's purposes for us too. We don't have to have it figured all out ahead of time. Contrast Peter with today's first reading. Isaiah had his call to discipleship to be a prophet back in the Old Testament times. And this was a completely mystical experience. Isaiah describes the vision he had of the heavens opening, the Lord sitting on a throne high above everything, the heavenly creatures flying around and echoing continually, holy, 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 at the awesome wonder before them. The hem of the Lord's robe filled the temple filled with smoke, representing how all-encompassing the Lord's presence is. The biggest similarity between Peter's call and Isaiah's call is that they both became aware of their sin. They did not feel that they were worthy enough to serve such a holy God. And they felt in need of forgiveness, which they did receive. Peter's response is more typical of the prophets. He says, "Go away from me, Lord." Isaiah's response is actually rather unusual in the Bible. He says, "Here am I, send me." He volunteered even though he had no idea what he was getting himself into. Yet while each of them had a different first reaction to when God called, each of them felt compelled, curious to follow, even though they had such vastly different experiences of God's presence. Peter's presence was more mundane, down to earth, and Isaiah's was more mystical. But this is a good thing for us to remember, that there is more than one way that people experience the presence of God. And we can honor that some mystical, even mysterious experiences of God that can be hard to put into words, and we can honor that some people have more down-to-earth experiences of God. Both are valid. Neither one makes you a better or worse Christian. The Lord's presence is so far-reaching, from the mystical to the mundane. You can never predict how God will choose to show up. It will be in whatever way God chooses. And that brings me to another point. So often, a special experience of God comes as a surprise. It's not something you can put on your calendar and say, "Okay, God, at such and such a date and time, you scheduled for you to give me an amazing experience of faith." Okay? Have it. We can't control God like that as much as we might like to. Now, that's not to say that we can't schedule time to cultivate our relationship with God. And it's not to say that those times are not special. Things like going to worship, receiving communion, studying the Bible, journaling, going to Sunday school or confirmation class, volunteering for a service project or mission trip, saying grace before meals, spending time in prayer and reflection. All of these and more are valuable ways for us to open our souls to God so that we are ready when He does decide to appear. The point is that God acts according to God's purposes and according to God's timetable, not ours. Even so, God does call us through baptism to be disciples. The word disciple means student. Jesus calls us to learn from Him so that we know how to rely on God in good times and bad, and also how to go and represent His love and grace to the people we meet. A few things Peter learned we can apply to ourselves. One is that he needed partners. Jesus told Peter to let down the nets into the deep water, and he caught so many fish that the nets began to break. The only way he could catch them all and bring them onto the boat was to signal his partners, James and John, who were in another boat, to come over and help him. We all need partners. We can each be a partner. Even in the midst of disagreements, we can regard each other not as adversaries, but as partners. And we can find ways to help each other grow to solutions. Our faith, even our doubt and desire, has more room to search for God's holiness and direction when we connect in friendship and partnership. Peter also learned that he needed to signal his partners on the other boat. They couldn't read his mind to know what he needed. He had to signal them. Likewise, as disciples of Jesus, we need to signal when we need help. We can help others better understand what we're going through, or we can signal to others that we're trying to understand them. A phrase I find helpful in doing this is turn to wonder. When something happens that you don't understand or you don't agree with or you feel defensive about, instead of turning to judgment, you can turn to wonder. Ask yourself, I wonder what brought them to this belief. I wonder what they're feeling right now. I wonder what my reaction teaches me about myself. Finally, Peter learned that Jesus wanted him to use his talents and knowledge about fishing that he already had. Peter applied what he knew in a new way, but this was a skill that he already possessed. Likewise, Jesus has given each of us talents and knowledge which we can apply in many different ways as we love and serve our neighbor in everyday life. After Peter caught all those fish, Jesus said to him, "Do not be afraid. From now on, you will be catching people." It's an interesting turn of phrase. Notice that Jesus didn't say, "You will be saving people." He said, "You'll be catching people." Only God saves. And God has done that for us all through Jesus going to the cross and rising again. Our calling as disciples is not to save or fix anyone. We can't. Our job is to cast a wide net out into the deep waters and to welcome all whom we find with the love of a holy, mysterious, yet down-to-earth God whom we know in Jesus Christ. Amen.